The pain was a white-hot fire, a relentless wave that had been crashing over me for hours. But then it was over, the final, desperate push, and then the sudden, blessed relief. The air filled with the sound of crying, not just one cry, but a chorus, 9 tiny, furious voices announcing their arrival. I fell back, drenched in sweat, my body a trembling, aching mess, and I began to weep. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief, from a love so fierce it hurt, from the sheer, impossible miracle of it all. My 9 daughters were here. They were alive. Through my tears, I looked over at my husband, Leo. I expected to see his face mirroring my own awe and exhaustion. I expected a hand to hold, a shared look of wonder. Instead, I saw something that shattered me more than the hours of labor ever could. NHE was laughing, and it wasn't a laugh of joy or relief. It was a low, cruel chuckle, laced with something dark and unsettling. He was looking at me, at my tear-streaked face, at my shaking body, and he was entertained. "Look at you," he said, his voice dripping with a mocking pity, "a complete mess. And for what? More girls. You actually did it. 9 of them. It's almost impressive how spectacularly you failed." NTHE air in the room turned to ice. The nurses bustling around the incubators fell silent, their movements freezing. My tears stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The physical pain was nothing compared to the sharp, brutal agony of his words, of that laugh. He wasn't my partner. He wasn't my support. He was a spectator, and my suffering was his private show. NHE leaned in closer, his smile widening as he saw the devastation on my face. "Don't look so sad, darling. It's hilarious. All that work, all that pain, for this, an army of disappointments." NHE laughed again, a sound that would echo in my nightmares for years. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a man lashing out in disappointment. This was who he truly was. He fed on the pain of others, and my deepest vulnerability, my most profound moment of creation, was nothing more than a joke to him. He thought my spirit was as broken as my body. But as he stood there, reveling in my despair, a different kind of fire began to burn within me, not the fire of labor, but the cold, patient fire of absolute hatred. My suffering was his entertainment. I decided then and there that I would write a final act to his little show, one he would never see coming. NHEY. Everyone, if this story has already grabbed you, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Now, let's get into how my life ended up in that horrifying moment. In the Charmer's Maskin, when I met Leo, he was the most charming man I had ever known. He had a magnetic personality that drew people to him like moths to a flame. He was a successful venture capitalist, a man who gambled on ideas and always seemed to win. He had a quick wit, a dazzling smile, and a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world. He pursued me relentlessly, with grand gestures and poetic compliments. He told me I was his anchor, his muse, the calm to his storm. I fell for him, hard and fast, believing I had found a once-in-a-lifetime love. NBUT even in the early days. There were subtle red flags, tiny cracks in his perfect facade that I chose to ignore. I saw glimpses of a strange cruelty that he disguised as humor. He'd make a cutting remark about a waiter and then laugh it off as a joke. He'd tell a story about a business rival's failure with a little too much relish in his eyes. He enjoyed seeing people off balance, seeing them squirm. I told myself it was just part of his competitive nature, the same drive that made him so successful. I didn't realize it was a symptom of a much deeper sickness, a profound lack of empathy, and our life was one of luxury. We lived in a penthouse apartment with panoramic city views, attended glamorous parties, and traveled the world. I was a jewelry designer, and he encouraged my craft, not because he valued my art, but because it added to our image as a power couple. He was proud of my success, but only as an extension of his own. NHI's desire for a son was not a quiet wish, it was a demand. He spoke of his heir, the boy who would inherit his empire and his killer instinct. He saw children not as individuals to be loved, but as assets to be acquired. When our first daughter Clara was born, he was outwardly pleased, but privately he treated her like a beautiful but flawed investment. "She's pretty," he once remarked, as if assessing a piece of art, "but she doesn't have the fire. The next one will." With each subsequent daughter, first Eva, then Maya, his disappointment became more palpable. He never raised his hand to them, but his cruelty was psychological, insidious. He would pit them against each other, praising one for her grades, while mocking another for her athletic ability in the same breath. He created an environment of constant, low-grade anxiety, where his approval was a prize to be won, but never kept. He was teaching them the same lesson he was teaching me, that love was conditional and could be withdrawn at any moment. When I became pregnant with non-uplets, his reaction was chilling. He wasn't excited. He was intrigued. He looked at me not with love, but with the calculating gaze of a gambler placing a huge bet. "9 shots at the jackpot," he said with a smirk. "The odds are finally in my favor." My body, my health, my fear, none of it mattered. I was a vessel for his ambition. The pregnancy was grueling, a constant battle to keep myself and the 9 tiny lives inside me healthy. And through it all, he watched me, not with concern, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an experiment. He was waiting to see if his investment would pay off. The vow of silence, and in the aftermath of the birth, Leo's cruelty didn't stop. It escalated. He treated the hospital room like his personal stage, performing for the nurses and doctors. He would bring me flowers and then whisper in my ear, "They're for the staff. You haven't earned anything." He would hold one of the babies for a photo, and as soon as the camera was down, he'd hand her back to a nurse with a look of distaste, as if he'd just touched something unclean. NHE reveled in my pain, both physical and emotional. He would ask me detailed questions about the birth, not out of concern, but because he seemed to get a perverse pleasure from hearing me recount the agony. "And then what happened?" he'd press, a gleam in his eye. "Was that the worst part?" My suffering was his favorite story, and I knew I had to leave him. But how? He was powerful, wealthy, and vindictive. He controlled every aspect of my life, from my bank accounts to my social circle. A direct confrontation would be disastrous. He would use his money and influence to crush me, to paint me as an unstable, hysterical woman, and take my children away just to punish me. He wouldn't want them, but he would take them to make sure I couldn't have them. NSO in that hospital bed, surrounded by the scent of antiseptic and his suffocating cruelty, I made a different kind of plan. It wouldn't be a plan of escape. It would be a plan of demolition. I would not run from him. I would stay, and I would become the architect of his ruin from the inside out. To do that, I had to become someone he would never suspect. I had to become invisible. I went home and played the part of the broken wife. I let him believe he had won. I cried when he expected me to cry. I was quiet when he wanted silence. I allowed his mockery to wash over me, letting him think his words were hitting their mark. On the outside, I was a shell of my former self. But on the inside, a cold, hard core of purpose was forming. Every insult, every laugh at my expense, every moment of humiliation, I didn't just endure it, I collected it. I stored it away like fuel. NMY daughters became my silent reason. I knew I had to protect them from the poison of his influence. I started creating a world within our world, a safe space where his darkness couldn't touch them. When he wasn't home, our penthouse was filled with laughter, art, and love. I taught them to be resilient, to find their strength not in his approval, but within themselves. I was raising them to be survivors. Just like me, NMY's secret war required a secret weapon. Mine was my jewelry design. He saw it as a harmless hobby, a little side project that kept me busy. He had no idea it would become the key to my freedom and his downfall. I started a private, unbranded online store, selling my pieces to a discreet international clientele. Every dollar I earned was funneled into a secret account he knew nothing about. It was slow at first, but it was a start. I wasn't just making jewelry. I was forging my escape hatch, link by link. In the art of deception and FOR, 5 years, I lived a double life. To Leo, I was the subdued, defeated wife he wanted me to be. I played my part so perfectly that he grew bored with me. His psychological games became less frequent because it's no fun to play with a toy that no longer reacts. His arrogance became my greatest asset. He underestimated me completely, and in doing so, he gave me the freedom to move in the shadows. While he was out conquering the financial world, I was building my own empire in secret. My jewelry business exploded. My unique, intricate designs, which often had hidden compartments and secret mechanisms, became a sensation among wealthy collectors who valued discretion and artistry. I was making more money than Leo could ever imagine, all of it flowing silently into offshore accounts and secure investments. I was no longer just a designer. I was a businesswoman, as shrewd and calculating as he was, but with a purpose beyond my own ego. NMY daughters were my silent partners. I enrolled them in the best schools, but I also gave them a different kind of education. I taught them about cybersecurity, about finance, about reading people. My eldest, Clara, became a coding prodigy. Ava developed an uncanny ability to analyze financial data. They understood, without me having to say it, that we were a team, and that the skills they were learning were for more than just a good report card. They were tools for our eventual liberation. And most important part of my plan was to understand the source of Leo's power, his money. I needed to know not just how much he had, but how he had made it. I hired a team of forensic accountants through a shell corporation I created, the best in the world. They were my ghost army, and I tasked them with a single mission: to dissect Leo's entire financial history. NTHE report they delivered was more damning than I could have hoped. Leo wasn't just a brilliant venture capitalist. He was a master criminal. His entire empire was built on a foundation of insider trading, market manipulation, and blackmail. He would identify a struggling company, secretly buy up its stock, and then use his influence to either build it up or crush it, profiting from the wreckage. He didn't just gamble, he rigged the entire casino. And the most damning part? He kept meticulous, arrogant records of his conquests on a password-protected, encrypted server, believing no one would ever be smart enough to find it or crack it. NMY daughter Clara, my quiet, brilliant Clara, looked at the security protocols for his server and said, "I can get in, Mom, but I'll need time." The final phase of my plan had just begun. We weren't just going to take his money, we were going to take his entire world. And the Trojan horse NTO get Clara the access she needed. I had to create a distraction, a big one. I had to get Leo out of the country for an extended period, far away from his precious server and his web of influence. The opportunity came in the form of a struggling biotech company in Switzerland. It was the perfect bait. The company was on the verge of a breakthrough but was bleeding cash. It was exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward situation Leo couldn't resist. And I used my own network of contacts, built through my jewelry business, to subtly feed him information about the company. I made it seem like an exclusive tip, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that only he was smart enough to see. His ego, as always, did the rest of the work. He became obsessed, convinced this was his next big conquest. He packed his bags for a 2-week trip to Zurich to seal the deal, leaving his kingdom in my hands. He smirked as he left, telling me to try not to burn the place down. "I won't," I said, smiling back. "I'll be very careful." NTHE moment his plane was in the air, my team moved in. Clara set to work on his server. It was a digital fortress, but she was a patient and brilliant siege engineer. For days she worked relentlessly, fueled by coffee and a quiet fury. While she worked, my other daughters and I began the process of liquidating my own assets, converting my secret wealth into untraceable digital currency. And on the 5th day, Clara broke through. "I'm in," she whispered, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. What we found was a digital confession. Leo had documented everything. Every illegal trade, every blackmailed executive, every manipulated stock. He had names, dates, bank records. It was a detailed blueprint of a criminal empire. But there was more. We found a folder labeled contingency. Inside was his plan for what he would do if he were ever caught. It involved shell corporations, fake passports, and a waiting private jet. His plan was never to face justice. It was to run. NWE copied everything, every file, every folder, every dirty little secret. We now held the keys to his kingdom and the proof of his crimes. The Trojan horse had been brought inside the city walls, and its belly was full of soldiers.